All right, the Subcommittee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. The purpose of this hearing, we are starting a minute early. It makes me feel good that we're on Army time. We're starting at least a little bit early, right? It's better than some. All right. Purpose of this hearing is to examine the Bureau of Consular Affairs fiscal year 24 budget. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. As I said, the Subcommittee on Oversight and Accountability will be discussing the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs. I want to begin by thanking our witness, Ms. Rena for being here today, as well as thank the thousands of Consular Affairs employees who work at regional passport agencies across the country and in embassies across the globe. With few exceptions, these men and women are committed to getting the job done. And when one of my constituents applies for a passport or reaches out when they run into trouble abroad, in my experience, it sets in motion a giant bureaucratic machine in many cases, and it's clear that that machine in many cases doesn't fire on all cylinders. And for the purpose of today's hearing for myself, I want to understand where those failures are and why that takes place. It's important because for many Americans, the Bureau of Consular Affairs is the only division of the State Department that they will ever interact with in their lives. Whether it's renewing a passport or dealing with an emergency abroad, we owe to those that we represent to make sure that this Bureau is getting things right no matter how big or how small the issue. And if an American's only experience with the State Department is a months-long delay on their passport application, then that's going to be the only thing that they remember about the Department of State. I come from a special operations background, and we had a saying that what makes special operations special is being able to do the most basic things at the highest possible level. And I'm not trying to diminish the importance of passports. They are arguably, however, the most common function of the Department of State. And last year, in reference to that, almost 18 million passport applications were received. That's a high number. It's very common, and yet it's clear that Consular Affairs isn't getting every one of them done in a timely fashion and at the highest possible level. On average, passport wait times are somewhere around 3 to 4 months, and that is a number that is increasing from what I understand. Visa wait times are even worse in many cases. Certain posts, it's not taking weeks or even months, it is taking years. I've dealt with this personally myself in trying to get people abroad those meetings. People are able to call their representative and usually get a passport renewed in a few days, but companies are also able to charge hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars and get it handled in a guaranteed 24 hours. An online system was developed for renewals by which most accounts got nearly 500,000 people to want to participate in, but that beta version crashed, leaving perhaps 500,000 people in limbo with that process. Here's what my constituents in some cases have had to say about their experiences in this process. So I just said goodbye to my family. I've been in tears all morning, very sad to see them all excited about the trip that I am supposed to be going on with them. The State Department has effectively made our families prisoners of the United States. These were a couple of quotes that people gave us after they were unable to get their passports when they needed them. I'm sure that my constituents would agree when I say that I would rather Consular Affairs efforts be spent on getting passports processed in a timely manner versus implementing gender-neutral passports. This change, as something else, effectively downgrades the gold standard of identification by allowing a person to not be identified as a man or a woman. Moreover, it's likely that this causes confusion for those ex-individuals who travel to foreign nations that don't recognize their pronouns, let alone the X next to their name on a U.S. government document. That's another problem. State needs to make sure that it's doing the basic things at the highest possible level, or the big things will fail miserably. And I understand that you came in the middle of this situation, but the crisis of evacuating or Americans from a collapsing Afghanistan went incredibly wrong. And I would love to ask your predecessor about much of what went on in that process. But while August of 2021 was far from a basic situation, it's clear that Consular Affairs operations were not performed at that time at the highest possible level. We have many questions about the withdrawal. What warnings were sent to American citizens and legal permanent residents in the weeks and days leading up to the pullout of Afghanistan, the pullout of our troops? What was Consular Affairs' roles in the contingency planning efforts? Why didn't we we have an accurate count of how many Americans were in Afghanistan? Why, to this day, are we failing so many of the special immigrant visa holders who served alongside us who were completely abandoned and left for dead? These aren't new questions. I asked the special envoy to Afghanistan in May of 21 about special immigrant visas, and he could not even tell me at that time how many Afghans were eligible for the program. So why then did State Department not devote major resources over the next months to answering that question and formulating a response plan before August of 21? Additionally, it is my understanding that consular affairs is involved anytime an American is arrested abroad. And when it's suspected that these arrests are based on shaky circumstances, it's the job of consular affairs to investigate. Why then, following the disastrous and deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan, was there an attempt to not classify some Americans as wrongful detainees or hostages? It flies in the face of something that I know my colleague and I here very much believe in, which is no man left behind. And it disregards the United States government most absolute fundamental job, the safety of United States citizens. State needs to make sure that it's doing the basic functions at the highest possible level, whether it's something like a passport or the national embarrassment that cost the lives of 13 service members. Americans are frustrated. We owe them answers. We do not owe them excuses. And again, I want to say that I'd give credit where credit is due. I know that consular affairs staff were back working in person far sooner than most federal government employees were in any other agency. But 3.5 years past the onset of the pandemic, I know very few people that accept COVID-19 as an excuse to this point, and I certainly do not as well. I'm confident that we all share a common goal, strengthening Americans' position on the global stage and making sure the basics are things that get done right in order to achieve that goal. I know it's important for all of us to work together in that. I am now going to yield to Ranking Member Crow for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, for calling this hearing and the opportunity to have this discussion today. You know, I have always loved the saying that hard things are hard. Right? It seems simple, and yet it's true, and it's a great reminder that the things that we talk about on this committee, the charge of this committee, is to have fact-based, rational discussions about very challenging work that people do around the world. That's why I'm looking forward to this discussion with you, Ms. Bitter, because I want to hear the story about the challenges that your people face. Every organization can do things better. Every organization can find ways of improving, of being more efficient, particularly when that organization faces crisis after crisis and contingency that forces you to evolve your model and change with a rapidly changing world. And I look forward to hearing about that. There are a couple of things that I know are true. I know that your organization in particular is complicated. You're spread out around the entire world in different cultures, in different countries, many of which are conflict zones. And you're dealing with people in their worst possible circumstances, when emotions are at the highest, when people are not ready for what's to come. And I look forward to hearing about that. The other thing I know is true is that your organization has a unique structure, that you are fee for service. So during the pandemic, when your revenue plummeted and Congress had to backfill that, you were able to maintain a lot of your employees, but at the same time, the extreme charge of travel post-pandemic, including me, by the way. I wanted to travel too and get out of my basement and get out of my sweatpants and travel, so as every other American, wasn't met with a commensurate increase in resources. And there was also a lag between those fees and your ability to onboard folks to meet that. So I look forward to hearing how you've met that unique challenge and some of the innovation you've done to find efficiencies, but also some of the resources you might need from Congress to meet some of those unmet needs. The other thing I know is true is that the chairman and I share a history in Afghanistan, are committed to Afghanistan, and we certainly know that things did not go well in many respects, and we continue to find ways to keep our promises to our allies and our partners. But what I also know is that the men and women of the State Department went through tremendous sacrifice volunteering to serve in a situation that was rapidly devolving, at great risk to themselves, to help their friends too. And you don't have to serve in uniform to have a monopoly on a commitment to our Afghan friends. And I know in my many, many discussions with my friends at the State Department and the Diplomatic Corps that this was horrific for them too. And they, at great personal expense and sacrifice, tried to make it right and still try to make it right. And I look forward to hearing that story. And finally, just a recent example of continued service by the men and women in your charge is Sudan. Again, not a perfect situation, one that not many people saw coming, but able to evacuate thousands of American citizens who have no obligation to register. Right? The United States of America is a free and democratic nation. We do not require American citizens to tell the government when and where they're going. That's who we are. We wouldn't do that. So it's very hard for you to know who is traveling and who is in a country during a conflict crisis, and I look forward to hearing that story and how you meet that unique challenge as well. So with that, thank you for coming in, and we look forward to the discussion, and I yield back, Chairman.
Very timely. You were much more timely than I was, so thank you for that. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished witness before us today on this important topic. The Honorable Rena is the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Consular Affairs at the U.S. Department of State from 2016 to 2020. She was the U.S. Ambassador to Laos People's Democratic Republic and has held many senior consular affairs positions, such as Consul General in the Ho Chi Minh City's Consular Chief in Amman, Jordan, and Non-Immigrant Visa Chief in London, so a number of stations. We thank you for being here today. Your full statement will be made a part of the record, and I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes. I now recognize Assistant Secretary Bitter for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and esteemed members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss the work of the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs and to express my appreciation for the support that we receive from members of Congress and from your staffs. The 13,000 people of the Bureau of Consular Affairs serve your constituents 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, across the United States and across the globe. Mr. Chairman, last fiscal year, we issued 41,000 visas to temporary agricultural workers to support Florida growers, the U.S. food supply, and state exports. Ranking Member Crow, in your district, our colleagues at the Colorado Passport Agency oversee a network of 124 acceptance facilities throughout the state for Coloradans to conveniently apply for passports. Around the world, consular officials are protecting the lives and serving the interests of U.S. citizens and safeguarding our national security. They are present for your constituents' best and worst moments: births, deaths, adoptions, illness. They worked in person both domestically and overseas during the pandemic to keep serving the public at great personal peril. Just last month, I attended a ceremony at the department to honor Tom Wallace, a consular officer who helped U.S. citizens repatriate from Peru back to the United States during the early days of the pandemic before losing his life to COVID-19. And his name deserves to have a place in the congressional record. When I have the opportunity to travel to our 29 passport agencies and centers and more than 240 overseas posts to meet directly with these extraordinary teams, I highlight 3 key priorities for the Bureau, all of which I look forward to discussing with you further today. First, the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas. This is the Bureau and the Department's highest priority. Diplomats have been working to protect the lives and vital interests of U.S. citizens abroad since before the United States had a constitution. It's our highest and most enduring purpose. Most recently in Sudan, we evacuated more than 2,000 U.S. citizens, their family members, along with lawful permanent residents, locally employed staff, and nationals from allied and partner nations in a complex multinational effort. Second, we're focused on maintaining record productivity in the face of unprecedented passport and visa demand. Demand for both U.S. passports and visas to the United States are at an all-time high. At the same time, right now, more people than ever before have the ability to travel to and from the United States. 46% of Americans today have passports, up from 30% in 2008 and just 5% in 1990. On the inbound travel side, more than 50 million valid visas are in the hands of foreign travelers. More people can visit the United States today than at any time in our history. These numbers are growing, and the Bureau of Consular Affairs is committed to meeting that demand today and into the future while rigorously safeguarding our national security. While we remain focused on addressing historically high demand for our passport and visa services, we are also planning for a more agile and optimized future. To that end, our third priority is modernizing consular systems and technology. For example, before the end of the year, 5 million Americans will be able to renew their passports entirely online, a major milestone in fulfilling our customer service goals. We cannot make meaningful progress on these priorities without sustained and significant investments in our IT infrastructure and staff. I'm grateful for Congress's partnership during the darkest days of the pandemic when our fee-funded bureau took a sudden 50% decline in revenue. Your appropriation and authorization to use consular revenue more flexibly has been the most important factor on our road to building a Bureau of Consular Affairs for the 21st century. Making these flexible authorities permanent would ensure that we are able to weather any contingency into the future. So I thank you again for your continued partnership, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. And I want to begin with this. You and I spoke this week. We spoke about an incident that I had. I'm not going to bring that up, but it's layered upon now in the time since you and I spoke and today. I had other members of the House of Representatives reach out knowing that we were having this hearing. And one representative's, Ms. McMorris-Rogers, she shared with us one of the emails that she just received. And I'm going to read it to you, but then it brings me to some questions that I'd like some answers on. And it starts out, good morning, and this is coming from the consular staff. This is coming from a customer service manager. I'm not going to give the name on camera, but you'll get a copy of this. Do you really think that listing a congressional assistance as the subject is sufficient, followed by 10 exclamation points? That is not a unique name. Please submit inquiries in the format as we have requested, this. I will be happy to place your inquiries at the bottom of the list if you do not cooperate. This one was delivered today via UPS, signed this customer service manager. So we could go into whether that's appropriate correspondence to come back to this representative or not. That's a different question for a different time. But what I want to know about is that ability for somebody to place inquiries at the bottom of the queue or the top of the queue and try to get some understanding of the essentially three-tiered system, I would call it, for getting a passport. You have individuals that are just reaching out on their own, that it may take them 3-4 months. You have individuals that reach out to their congressional offices, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter, that in most cases I find that we can probably get it done in 48 hours. However, I wouldn't go out so far as to say I could guarantee them 24 hours in most circumstances. And then you have this third tier of private companies that offer 1, 2, or 3 days, but essentially guaranteeing that somebody can get it in a day for a certain fee. Can you help explain to me how that is broken up within these consulates for us to have people served that reach out to us or that are getting served directly? And can they put people at the bottom of the list or the top list? And by what means and reasons are they doing so?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer your question in short, of course, that's not an acceptable way for one of our customer service managers to talk to anyone, let alone a member of Congress. So I just want you to hear me say that. And you have my apology, and every member of the committee has this apology, and also Representative McMorris-Rogers, and I will look forward to seeing that correspondence. The way that our systems work, basically, for the most part, the way prioritization works is first in, first out. We do have a system where you can pay extra for an expedited passport. Right now, regular processing is 10 to 13 weeks, and expedited is 7 to 9. As you have pointed out, it is not ideal. We're facing unprecedented passport demand. Last year, we issued 22 million books and cards.
I'm going to pause you for a moment, ma'am. I understand the numbers. You went over them in your remarks, but I want to understand the inner workings of the department, more so to specifically to understand how an outside group can guarantee that, but when somebody reaches out to our offices, we can't guarantee that. What is that breakup of the numbers for if you have 30 consular officers working in an office? Are 10 of them working on members of Congress, 28 members of the House of Representatives from Florida and 2 senators, and 10 of them are working on the general list that comes in, and 10 of them are working for the fee-for-service folks? How is that broken down?
It depends on the passport agency. It depends on what's going on. It's a little bit of a hard question to answer, but I'm very happy to give it my best shot. And
Please
if you
do
need
so.
more detail, I would love to set up a more detailed briefing for you or your team. So we have regular processing, we have expedited processing, we also have emergency processing, where we have counter appointments for people who have true emergencies in person. Our staff sees 23,000 of these per week. They have expanded those hours. It's greater than it was pre-pandemic, and they're committed to continuing to expand them as long as we're facing the demand that we're facing, and as long as Americans have emergency needs to travel. I want to refer back actually to our conversation in your office, because you drew my attention to the courier agencies that we also have working, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that briefly, because I am grateful to you for raising it, and it's something that I looked into after we left. The courier service was in place prior to the pandemic, and we reinstituted it in December. What I want to assure you of is that while our agencies do work with courier companies to set aside a certain number of appointments, there is no guarantee. It's negotiated with the passport agency. We monitor it closely to make sure, in particular, that it is not taking away any capacity from counter appointments, from emergency appointments in particular, or from any of the other work that we're trying to do. So I want to assure you of that. One thing that you raised was one thing that we don't monitor. We do monitor the couriers themselves, and we do monitor to ensure that they are not taking up appointments that should go to your constituents, to regular Americans. You had raised the issue of high fees, and we don't monitor that. And I'm grateful to you for raising it, because I think it's something that we're going to look into.
My time has expired. I now yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Bitter, could you expound a little bit on this idea of how the fee for service plays with your ability to match surges in demand? You mentioned earlier that there's a record number of U.S. passport holders, that number has just surged tremendously in the last decade in particular. What are you doing to meet that surge, onboard new employees, and expand the pipeline? Thank
you for asking the question, sir. And I'm going to have to mention the pandemic, even though I agree with Chairman Mast that the time has passed for talking about the pandemic, but there is a real relationship between where we are and where we were then. We are fee for service, and so the fees that we take in are completely related to how much the service that we provide costs the American people. At the pandemic, we lost 50% of that overnight, and it is because of our relationships with Congress that we were able to work with you to get an appropriation. We had to freeze our staff, but thanks to the appropriations, we were not forced to fire people. When we were not able to start hiring again until our fees returned, During that time period, Congress also gave us expanded spending authorities so that we could move fees more easily between the different parts of our services so that we could address emerging challenges. So when fees began to come back, when international travel resumed in late 2021, we were able to start hiring again. We could hire passport adjudicators because passport fees were coming in. But thanks to the expanded spending authorities, we were also able to begin hiring overseas visa adjudicators as well. So we were able to start bringing on more people into overseas positions. We would not have been able to do that before the expanded authorities that you all gave us during the pandemic. Both on the domestic side and on the overseas side, these are national security positions. Every passport adjudication, every visa adjudication is a national security position. And it does take time to onboard people, to ensure that they have the appropriate clearances, to make sure they're suitable, to train them, in many cases, in quite difficult languages. So all of these things take a little bit of time before we're able to get people out in the field. We were able to start hiring for overseas positions in the beginning of 2022, and people started reaching the field by the summer of 22. We still have positions overseas vacant. On the passport side, we have been able, over the past year, to build our team by 10%. We've increased the number of passport adjudicators. We have about that many in the pipeline. And you'll see in our foreign ops plan and also in our 2024 budget, is just we've notified requests for more staff. We need more staff to address these issues. I'll say one more thing, if I may, which is we don't want to surge our way out of this. We don't want to insist on people doing overtime. We want to be able also to invest in modernized systems and equipment to be able to support these functions. So our budget and our ops plan both go not only to hiring the people that we need to address these issues, but also to making sure that they have appropriate systems and the best modernized systems possible for the 21st century.
So shifting quickly to crisis and contingency operations, I'd like a quick note from you on what those look like on the ground, because a lot of times people will say, well, there are X number of American citizens in this conflict zone, why can't we get these folks out? But the reality is many of them are dual nationals, many of them have family members that they don't want to leave behind. Oftentimes they don't understand when a crisis reaches a tipping point, and after it reaches that tipping point, then it becomes much harder to get out. People don't want to leave their residence until that moment. So can you paint a picture for me as to the complexity of accomplishing those missions?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your asking the question. You've highlighted it, and I think the chairman did as well. We do not track American citizens. What we can do, and the most important thing we do, is to provide timely and accurate information so that they can make the best possible decisions about their own safety and security in traveling overseas. In crises, we increase our communication with American citizens. We try to inform them with the most accurate information about changing circumstances, about what they may face in any overseas environment. We offer them assistance when it's time. When we are approaching a crisis, we urge Americans to leave. We offer them assistance in leaving. We offer them repatriation loans if we can get them to leave. We offer to assist them with making commercial arrangements. And if circumstances permit, and they have in some circumstances, we may offer non-commercial options. But you highlighted the exact challenge. It is very, very difficult. We're asking people who are dual nationals with long residencies in these countries and really deep family relationships that they are unwilling to leave. And making decisions about when and whether to leave is an extraordinarily difficult decision that we're asking people to make. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Perry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Do travel documents that Americans receive from the federal government allude in any way to the fact that those traveling, presenting those documents, must abide by the laws of the countries that they are interested in visiting?
I don't know if the passport does. I'd have to take a look, but certainly our travel advice advises Americans
Certainly
to
your
do so.
travel advisory does, and I would encourage you to take a look at the passport. And with that, in February of 2022, Brittany Griner was arrested for drug possession in Russia. I don't think there's any dispute about that. Now, we fast forward 10 long months later, and the United States did a one-for-one prisoner swap for Brittany Griner. They traded a well-known arms dealer, Victor Bout, named, or kind of called his nickname as the Merchant of Death, right? Now, I think everybody here understands that wrongful detention, each case has its own intricacies and a lot of unique issues. However, in that case, the decision that she was wrongly detained was made in a matter of weeks, yet we have others locked up overseas where determinations have taken years, or literally there never is a determination. Do you have any insight as to why it appears, certainly to most Americans, that the case of Brittany Griner was rushed? Did it have anything to do with what some would consider celebrity status?
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate the question. First, I want to thank Congress. I think what you're referring to, the wrongful detention determinations, are made under a law that Congress passed called the Levinson Act, and we're grateful for it because it's a tool in our toolkit, and we really appreciate Congress's interest in this issue. We work in lockstep with our special presidential envoy for hostage affairs in making these determinations. It starts with, as you've highlighted, and you know this, that it's based on the totality of the circumstances. For our part in the Bureau of Consular Affairs, where we care about all detainees overseas, there are more than 1,700 American citizens detained overseas, and our officers are the ones on the front line who visit them, who insist on consular access.
Ma'am, with all due respect, I got all that, but look, it was 10 long months, but you just named literally over 1,000, right? You didn't name the 1,000, but you characterized over 1,000 people wrongfully detained overseas, yet in this particular case, it seems like America went way above and beyond the call of duty, and thank goodness they did. We want every single American home. Whether or not they've broken the law overseas, we can take care of that here in the United States, but it certainly seems like there's two standards here, and I'm trying to get to whether there was a particular standard that was afforded to Ms. Griner as a priority to win political points for social justice warriors or otherwise. We traded the Merchant of Death, and I think it's important that everybody understands that this guy found his way around sanctions in Angola, Liberia, Sierra Leone, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, he was involved in the Yugoslav wars in the 90s. In the 2000s, once again involved in selling arms to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Lebanon, Tajikistan, Libya, and Tripoli. In the case of the Kenyan arms, they were used to attack our allies in Israel. This guy's a dangerous guy, and how, is it your opinion, or would it be your professional opinion, that we didn't just incentivize every enemy of the United States to hold captive American citizens that wish to exchange that person for some high-value target that the United States is lawfully detaining?
Again, I think I may have misspoken, and if I did, I apologize. I referred to 1,700 Americans detained overseas, not wrongfully detained. With respect to the Brittany Griner case, as I mentioned, we work with our colleagues in the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage
Okay, so
Affairs.
how did the special circumstances occur? Why did they occur?
Again, we work in lockstep with them.
I know you do, but what happened?
And I'd like to defer to them to ensure that you get the best possible answer.
You have no knowledge of these proceedings whatsoever?
The proceedings of?
Regarding Brittany Griner's release and trade for the Merchant of Death, while other detainees, wrongfully detained or otherwise, remain rotting in foreign prisons around the globe.
And I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to give you a little bit of a bigger picture so I can be clear about why I would like to defer to my colleague in SPIHA, which is because once, again, under the Levinson Act, somebody is determined to be wrongfully detained, then the lead for the case switches, and it becomes SPIHA in that instance. So while we work very closely and in lockstep, as I say, I want to defer to them to answer your questions in greater detail.
I thank the chairman. That was, with all due respect, that was not an answer, but I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Kim for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming on out here and talking with us. I wanted to lift up some of the work that you all are doing and dive in a little deeper, get an understanding of the dynamics there. You mentioned about 13,000 staff that's in the consular affairs. Do you know offhand sort of some breakdown of how many of them are foreign service, civil service, or does that number also include locally employed staff?
It does not include locally employed staff, but I don't have the breakdown in front of me.
Okay, well, look, we can get some follow-up on that front, but, you know, what we're talking about here is if you're saying that there are going to be foreign service and civil service that combine for that number, you know, my understanding is that State Department is at around, I think, around 26,000 total for foreign service and civil service. So you're saying that the consular affairs is taking up potentially a massive portion of what the staff of the State Department would be. Is that correct?
We are a big bureau.
Yeah. You talked a lot about this already today, about the fee-for-service, how you're funded through that capacity. I wanted to ask, does Consular Affairs get back 100% of the fees that it's being provided for the services that they're rendering, or does some of that money get diverted to other parts of the State Department?
Thanks for asking. Depending on the fee, some of it goes to the Treasury, and a very, very large, well, not a large, excuse me, but a percentage of our budget does go to the platform of the State Department to be able to support the services that we provide.
So in terms of what goes to other parts of the State Department, is that your determination, or who's determining where these resources go and how much of this funding goes back to the Bureau that is actually providing the services here?
We work with our partner bureaus, we call them, on service level agreements. And just to, if I may, just for a big picture, we are fee funded, but we are part of the State Department.
Yep.
And so if I had one plea for Congress, it would be to fund the State Department, because the platform that they provide is the platform that we sit on. So IT services,
Yeah.
their partner bureau, hiring, clearing people, contracts, training, all of these parts of the department are hardworking colleagues in the department.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, and as someone who worked there before, you know, I'm somebody that absolutely will be fighting here in this committee and elsewhere for increased funding writ large. I guess what I'm just trying to get at is for us to be thinking about as a whole, you know, are we properly prioritizing consular affairs and the work that you're doing within the broader context of the department? As you mentioned, the staffing is an enormous percentage of what the State Department is. The funding, you're right, there's the platform of the State Department as a whole, but you're the only portion of it that has this other arrangement in terms of not having that guaranteed in that kind of capacity. And so, you know, I guess I just, you know, I'm not going to necessarily put you on the spot here, but it's for, you know, all of us here in this committee and more broadly to kind of be thinking about that. I'll be honest with you, when I think about what part of the State Department has the most amount of direct interaction with the American people, would you say that it's probably your bureau?
I would say 100% it's our bureau.
And in terms of which part of the State Department has the most direct interactions with foreign nationals and businesses that are thinking about coming to the United States, is it your bureau?
Yes, absolutely.
So, you know, that's what I just kind of want to hone in here. I've been really focused on this with my work. You know, when I think about what my constituents are thinking about, you know, the 780,000 people that I represent, when they're thinking of the State Department, they're often thinking about your bureau and whether or not they can get that passport in time, or whether or not their family member can get a visa to come for their wedding. And I say that because it's important for us to do the big picture work, the diplomacy and the multilateralism out there, but we also just need to really crush it when it comes to the work that is directly related to the American people. And so I just ask us to really think about that. That is a first order effort. It's something I didn't really think about when I was at the State Department. But we have to earn the trust and respect of the American people. We have to think about what it is that they're interacting. How do we make that as frictionless as possible? So, for instance, I love for us to think through, and work with the State Department. Is a bureau the appropriate level? Should we have an undersecretary, for instance, that is focused on this? Make this a bigger pillar of the State Department. Should we think about ways in which we can ensure that funding, make sure you can have control over the funding, especially the funding that is because of the services that you're providing? Those are the things that I'd love for us to dive in deeper. I'd love to keep working with you on it. My time has expired, so I'll yield back to the chair, but let's keep this conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I now recognize Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, I'm the co-chair of the U.S.-India caucus. I think it's one of the most consequential economic, diplomatic, security relationships we have in the 21st century. However, one of the consistent and painful complaints that I receive from Indian Americans and from our Indian colleagues is the wait time. Despite the fact that in India, I believe you have the second or third most consular affair officers, and the data that I have is the average waiting period in Mumbai, India was 587 calendar days. And with our trade, over $150 billion, with the consequential relationship with Prime Minister Modi coming for a state dinner and visit just this month. What are we doing to fix this? I mean, have you looked at any India-specific policy fast tracks or issues? Have you looked at even perhaps a quad umbrella or bubble for some of these critical business relationships? In my state, just in Florida, it's estimated that $28 billion in trade, conferences, events, and visitors, that's 250,000 jobs are affected by these delays. So what are we doing to fix it?
Thank you very much. If I may, I'll address India first, and then if I could zoom out a little bit and talk.
Good. Very briefly, I have 2 more questions I want to get to.
Got it. Thank you
Great.
very much. So with respect to India, there has been quite a bit of pent-up demand. I just want to highlight that we've, for all of the reasons that you have mentioned, we really have prioritized India pretty significantly.
At 587 days of
For
delay?
one category of visa applicant, for virtually every other category of visa applicant, wait times are pre-pandemic levels or below.
So what's the category that's 587? Is that B1 business?
First-time tourist visa
Okay.
applicants. We have opened appointments for Indian applicants at other posts that are dedicated just to Indians to make sure that they are able to get their travel needs met. We surged staff to India. We reduced wait times by about 2/3 at the beginning of the year. And we'll continue to focus on it. We're very aware of these issues. If I may, because you referred to some of the challenges that your constituents are facing, over the course of we do have high wait times in some posts for first-time tourist visa applicants. But I want to highlight that this year to date, we have issued 22% more visas than we issued pre-pandemic fiscal year to date. And I want to mention that because we're working very, very hard on these issues. We've employed a variety of different...
Just in the time that I have left, it sounds like you're taking steps. It sounds like they're not moving fast enough, at least to meet the demand. And your bureau should not be the obstacle. You should be the facilitator. And if you need more resources, you need more authorities, I hope that a year from now, we're not still talking about, on any category, over a year wait time. I just want to switch to Afghanistan. I know you're not responsible for or you're not the lead for the SIVs, but you are for the P1, P2, correct?
Actually, it's the reverse. We're the lead for SIVs, but not for P1, P2.
You're not for the P1, P2. My understanding from SIGAR is that at the current, from the Special Inspector General, that the current processing rate to move through all of our allies that are still waiting, that are still in harm's way, that fought and served with us, with me, it'll take 18 years to process that many visas. These people are being hunted down by the Taliban right now as we speak, despite the president and your boss, the secretary, lauding this as an outstanding success, it was an absolute disaster and a disgrace. What are we doing to get through those SIVs faster? Because they're being hunted and killed right now.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. And also, thank you for your service. One of the things that is, makes Afghanistan unique is the number of people, and the number of people on this committee who served and sacrificed there, and who are deeply engaged and who care. And I just want to assure you and everybody on this committee that—
Deeply engaged, forever scarred by the failures of our own government, frankly. But please, tell me what little can we do to fix it or to make it better?
We are deeply committed to this program. Since the inception of the program, 104,000 Afghans and their families, Afghan allies and their families, are living in the United States. And since the end of the evacuation in September, we've issued more than 22,000 visas to our Afghan allies and family members. More than 12,000 of those have been issued just in this fiscal year. So we are dedicated.
But if you look at how long it's going to take to process those that were left behind, they don't have another year or two to hide from the Taliban. And if we had done our job, if the State Department had done their job, you wouldn't have veterans groups exhausting their savings, exhausting their kids' 529 plans, getting divorced, committing suicide because of the people we left behind. So please don't paint a rosy picture on this. Come to us and tell us what we need. I mean, you're right. You do have our commitment. You have our commitment and the resources and the authorities you need to move faster.
Right.
So please come to us and let us know what that is so that we don't have more dead Afghans that we left behind while waiting on bureaucracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
I now recognize Ms. Sherfilis McCormick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Secretary Bitters, conferences and trade shows support over 225,000 jobs and create over $28.2 billion in economic impact across Florida each year. They also support countless small businesses throughout the 20th District, nationwide, and in Florida. Unfortunately, international buyers and exhibitors from many countries remain unable to return to the events in the U.S. due to ongoing visitor visa appointment wait time delays. Wait times for visitor visa appointments currently exceed 180 days in 70 U.S. embassies and consulates around the world. For example, as of today, 737 days in Mexico City, 630 days in Sao Paulo, and 600 days in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. With international attendees needing 6 to 9 months of lead time to come to business events in the U.S., we remain closed for businesses to many who would be buyers and exhibitors who not only spend money at these conferences and trade shows, but also drive demand for restaurants, hotel, and travel. Beyond its normal operations, what is the Consular Affair doing to urgently bring down the visitor visa appointments, wait times, at U.S. outposts in the world?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. One thing I just want to highlight is that today, more people can travel to the United States today, get on a plane today, than at any other time in our history. That said, we do have long wait times for first-time tourist visa applicants at certain posts. As I was mentioning earlier, we are working enormously hard on that, and we have reduced median wait times globally to about 2 months for first-time tourist visa applicants. But globally, in every other category of visa applicant, wait times are at pre-pandemic level or better. We've issued 22% more visas year to date than we did prior to the pandemic. And in fact, at our 4 highest producing posts, which have the biggest backlogs as well, we have issued 57% more visas than we did prior to the pandemic. This is a result of extraordinary pent-up demand, and we are working through it. We're getting more staff to the field. And I should also highlight, particularly for the kind of events that you're talking about, we have a business visa unit here in Washington. We would love to be able to work with these organizations to be able to make sure that visas aren't an impediment.
Well, you talked about the awareness of the issue. Do you have any tangible goals for your businesses that you're trying to meet by the end of the year?
I'm sorry,
You said that you have awareness of it. What are your tangible goals for reducing these wait times? Because as I mentioned, they're all over 500 days. So do you have any tangible goals by the end of the year that you want to see reduced, especially in the cities that I mentioned? Mexico
Sure.
City, San Paulo, Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
So thank you for asking that. For some of the places, again, median, we're talking about a 2-month wait time. But there are posts where we have, and you have mentioned them, much longer wait times. Our goal is for everybody, all of our posts, to be below 120 days. And we are working to get there. The more staff we get out in the field, the more we'll be able to do
So
that.
specifically, my question was about the business communities. You said that you're aware of them, and you have an office that you're working with. Is there any plan to expedite their visas or to make sure they're reduced?
So every post in the world has an expedite program where they are able to get in touch with the consular section to be able to ask for an expedited appointment. More than that, if those businesses are in touch with the commercial offices or others in the embassy, we always want to make sure that for travel that is in the U.S. government interest, like important business events, that those people have access to quicker appointments.
In January of 2021, President Obama issued an executive order requiring 80% of non-immigrant visa applications were interviewed within 3 weeks after their application was received. When will the U.S. embassies and consulates be able to interview 80% of all non-immigrant visa applications within 3 weeks?
Right, thank you. We do remember that executive order. The circumstances, of course, were quite
But for
different.
time, I'm just wondering, when will you guys be able
Right.
to meet that?
As I mentioned, we're looking at trying to get down for all of our posts. Again, we're already at 2 months median globally. We'd like for most of our posts, if not all, to get to 120 days by the end of the year.
Do you have a projection by the end of the year?
That's what our goal is, and we're going to work towards it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Mills for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Bitter. You know, I wanted to note a couple of things. You know, you talked about, and so did the ranking member, Mr. Crow, who I have a tremendous amount of respect, and I had served with in Iraq in the same brigade, about timeline tipping points, and many of us not wanting to leave family behind when they talk about the American citizens trapped in Afghanistan. And you talked about the increase in communication with U.S. personnel and even an offer of assistance in leaving. I want to play a quick video, if I may. If you could direct your attention here. So I want to tell you what you're looking at right now. Right now you're looking at an American family who is sitting outside of Abbey Gate, where the U.S. State Department said that we were to go to in order to receive support for us to be able to assist, and I'm using your language, assist in leaving. Now, this wasn't a family who didn't want to leave. This is a family, as you can see, showing their American passports, begging to be able to come inside to have a chance at survival. Now, I want to also make mention that this is a significant date, August 26th. Do you know where that family is now? They're dead. Do you find it acceptable that an American family, remember what President Biden said when he asked the question, he said, if you want to leave Afghanistan, all you have to do is show your blue passport. There's a family showing their blue passport. Do you find that acceptable, that they had no U.S. consulate representative or State Department personnel to help them? And do you know why that is? And I'm going to read the statement from the Marines. On March 8th, we had Marine Sergeant Tyler Vargas Andrews from the Department of State said that the State Department at HKIA would completely shut down processing of Afghans and Americans every evening and even into the morning, leaving ground forces with a nightmare that they did not work in reasonable rotations and very much presented an unwillingness to work in the situations. A further member, a platoon sergeant in the Marine Corps, stated that my biggest gripe, his biggest gripe, bearing in mind 13 Americans were killed in uniform, some of which were his Marines. His biggest gripe was that the Department of State personnel, they would come out to do their shift and randomly show up and leave. They were slowing down the entire process, and I couldn't understand what the thought process was behind this. Can you answer why the U.S. consulate one, wouldn't work around the clock to ensure Americans were receiving the necessary attention they need, like that family who's dead, to be able to get out of country when it is their right, but as a blue passport holding American, to have our government to be able to support them?
Thank you for the opportunity to answer that question. I'm going to just start by addressing, just reflecting on my department colleagues who volunteered from all over the globe to go to Kabul to assist their colleagues and to assist American citizens. And I am overwhelmed with admiration for what they did and gratitude.
Ma'am, that's great, and I appreciate it as well, but I'm also the only member of Congress who actually conducted rescues myself of Americans out of Afghanistan, who spent 3 years of my life in Afghanistan, 7 years of my life in Iraq. I appreciate service as well, and guess what? I also served with the Department of State.
I honor your service as well, sir. And I honor the service of the Marine who was mistaken when he said there were not consular officers at the gates. Consular officers worked 24 hours, 7 days a week on 12-hour
Well, ma'am, that was one of the
shifts.
gates right there.
They worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, throughout the airport complex, wherever they were needed, side by side with their military colleagues in diplomatic security, on all aspects of identifying and facilitating American citizens.
Well, ma'am, in my last
And
minute, though, you're saying that they were at every single gate. I just showed you video proof of an American family who was trying to leave at the gate that they were text messaged by Task Force Afghanistan, which is a State Department task force. Meet here and we will show your passport to let you in. Did you see them getting let in, or had anyone assisting them in that effort?
it is really, I think you're aware of how challenging and complex the situation at the gates was. Our colleagues were there. They were everywhere they needed to be.
So you're saying that these Marines are lying, right, in their testimony where they're saying that they did not see the consulate officers staying there, and that, to quote him again, he said that they would leave every evening and come late in the morning. Now, this is from Sergeant Tyler Vargas Andrews, who is the sniper who could have actually have killed the suicide bomber, but wasn't given any permissible approvals and is now an amputee and suffers from many other things. So are you saying that his testimony is false then, that he's not right in saying that State Department and consulate officials were at the gates with him?
I'm saying that he is mistaken.
Well, Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Titus for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to some of the questions about the visas. I represent Las Vegas, and so this visa issue is very important to us, not just for visitors, tourists coming, but also for conventions and planning, and conventions have gotten more international all the time, and how to plan whether you're going to come to a conference or a convention or you're going to be represented at a trade show. So this issue is very important to us. We got 40 million visitors coming to Las Vegas every year. $20 billion in wages, $80 billion in overall economic output. So if this falls apart, people are devastated. So I know that we mentioned some of the excess wait times. They've gone up and down in India, but other places that have a big impact on us are Brazil and Mexico. Mexico and Canada are a source of our main visitors. So if we can't get from Mexico or from Brazil, it's a serious problem. So we're talking about ways to help bring down the backlog. I know that President Obama at his time issued an executive order that 80% of all temporary visas would be issued in less than 21 days, and that really worked. It brought a high of 114 days down to just 2 days in 2012. Now, unfortunately, the last president, Trump, did away with that, and I wonder if there are any plans by the State Department or President Biden to put that back in place, or if that would be a good idea, or if not, what might work. I know it's a goal, but what are some specifics?
First, we think about Las Vegas a lot. We know how important tourism is to Las Vegas, and we visited many recent travel shows that have been held there, and so we really appreciate what your how important this is to you and to your constituents. Just to go to the executive order, I think the challenges that were being faced in 2012 are not the challenges that we face in 2022. We are already so productive. We are already processing so many more visas than we did at that time, that what we are looking for is simply more staffing in the field, and we are absolutely getting it out there as quickly as we possibly can to be able to conduct these visa interviews as quickly as possible. Again, for every category that doesn't require an interview, and for every category that is students and others repeat travelers, our wait times are pre-pandemic or better. And I would also highlight that we have brought wait times for first-time visitor visas down 50% since the beginning of the fiscal year. So we're going to absolutely keep at it, and with your constituents in mind. The other thing I want to highlight is that we do have a business visa unit. If you hear of conventions that are taking place, please let us know. I think one of the proudest moments I had in this job was when we got a thank you tweet from the Consumer Electronics Show, because I think a third of the attendees there were international. So again, this is something we think about a lot. We think about it all the time, and we're excited because, again, more people than ever before are able to travel to the United States right now, and we want to facilitate that and be part of the future.
Well, is there anything that we can do as a committee or Congress besides just giving you resources for more staff and equipment to, for example, a virtual interview process, or any way to help along those lines?
I can tell you one priority and then two legislative priorities I would love to quickly talk about.
Please.
One priority is, I spoke briefly about this when Mr. Kim was talking. We are fee-funded, but we are also part of the State Department. So ensuring that the State Department is fully funded and that the management platform on which we sit is robust and healthy is really important to us, to be able to hire, to be able to execute contracts, training, getting people out into the field. So that's really important. And then we do have two legislative authorities that I'd be happy to talk briefly about. One is one of the things that Congress gave us in the aftermath of the pandemic was expanded spending authorities, which allow us to move fees more flexibly across our global enterprise. Those authorities are year to year, and we would be very grateful if they could be made permanent, because some of the things that we want to do, making investments in IT and really hiring to meet this demand, we need to be able to plan on a more long-term basis than year to year. And then finally, there's a passport fee, the passport application and execution fee, that we were given authority to collect in 2022 and to expend that year, but in subsequent years we are allowed to collect it but not expend it. That money can be used as a source to assist American citizens overseas. Right now we have to move money around and borrow or steal from visa money to be able to fund some of the unfunded things that we do overseas, like visiting people in prison, for example, and other things. So given the fact that 46% of Americans now have passports, above 30% just 13 years ago, we know those people are going overseas. So we want to make sure that we have a dedicated source of funding that we can use to assist them if they're in trouble overseas. And I think I'm out of time. Thank you for letting me get through that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize Ms. Dean for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and thank you, Ambassador Bitter, for testifying today. I represent suburban Philadelphia, Montgomery, and Berks counties. I want to, number one, say thank you to members of your team who came and did a passport processing day on a Sunday. I can't tell you, more than 100 folks came in and got their passports or renewals processed. I can't tell you how thankful my constituents were that your team worked so diligently with ours. So thank you for that. We're all talking about passports and the increase in it. And maybe you can speak to this, and I don't want to belabor the point, but my district staff now has seen an incredible increase in passports, passport-related issues. So far this year, we've worked with about 500 constituents. That's normal and pre-pandemic. We would have worked with that many in a full year. So if you could speak to that, what's going on that is driving that? And I do want to ground this in what the title of the hearing is, which is Examining the Fiscal Year 2024 Budget Request by the Bureau. So if you could speak to that, and then I have a second set of questions.
Great, thank you, I really appreciate it. First
Thank
of all,
you.
thank you for your kind words for our team, and I realize I've gotten through an hour without talking about how proud we are of our passport teams in particular, who are extraordinarily hardworking, who have worked incredible amounts of overtime to meet the demand for passports. So thank you for saying that, and also for your partnership. Members of Congress and your staffs are the best way that we have to reach the American people and your constituents. So thank you for that. You highlighted, and it's really true. What we are facing is truly unprecedented passport demand, and that is it is creating wait times for passports that are longer than we would like. I've mentioned this before, but it's really worth highlighting. I mean, we produced 22 million passport products last year, and this year we are likely to produce 25 million, which is about a 15% increase. So we're really working very hard to keep up. And because of the trends that we see in the percentage of Americans that have passports, we do not think that this is an anomaly. We think this is a trend. So we've been hiring and doing our best to bring as many people on as possible. We've increased our team by 10% this year, with about 10% more in the pipeline. So what you'll see in our 23 ops plan and in our 24 budget is where we notified and want to bring on as many new passport adjudicators as we can, but also overseas staff.
Do you have an idea the number of folks, of staff you're talking about, whether nationally or overseas?
Sure, it's I hope that you don't make me do math in public, but it's 177 new passport adjudicators.
Okay.
And then I think it's 285 total. So
Okay.
Please
Thank
don't
you.
make me do the subtraction.
no,
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah. And finally, in the time remaining, I too want to take a look at the SIVs and Afghanistan. What were some of the challenges for the Special Immigrant Visa Program in the lead-up and during the evacuation of Afghanistan, and what's the current state of the SIV pipeline? We are all, I don't care what party, what color, you could be purple, we all care about making sure that those folks are processed as quickly as possible, and we're devastated that so many have not been able to access that. What's the stat? What was the challenge coming into it, and what is the status now?
Thank you. I'm going to focus on where we are now, just because I started in the middle, just as the evacuation started, and so the challenges that the program faced prior to that, I don't have as much direct knowledge on, although we are very happy to talk to you and your staff separately about it. But I do kind of want to focus on where the program is today. We share your commitment and dedication to this. Truly, we do. And we are, since the evacuation ended, we have been able to adjudicate or to issue 22,000 Afghan allies who are now living in the United States. And we've been able to increase our efficiency. Just 12,000 of that 22,000 is just in this fiscal year to date. So we're working really hard to be as efficient as possible.
How many are in the pipeline?
I'm going to pause for 1 second. It's a little bit hard to say how many are in the pipeline because the program's still open. The ones that we focus on are ones that have that are approved for the program. There are several different steps. The Special Immigrant Visa Program is at base an immigrant visa program, and so the folks who are applying for it have to show that they are qualified for the visa before they can even apply for the visa. And then once they apply for the visa, which is when we start working with them, they have to meet the same regulatory and the same documentary and the same kinds of requirements that any other immigrant visa applicant has to meet. And some of these cases are complex. We have a national security responsibility as well as a facilitation responsibility. But again, there are a lot of steps that are dependent on the applicant. Where we're focused, one thing I should also say is to the extent that we have the authority to streamline the process, we have done so, and we're looking for more ways to do so. But what we're really looking for is once people are approved for they've approved for the visa and it's time to apply, that's where we want to do more to just expand our capacity and to create more platforms where we can see more applicants.
I know I've gone way over. I thank you. I thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Also, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Issa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off by telling you a story to set the stage for my question. Just less than 3 weeks ago, the governor of one of our larger states flew in the governor's plane to Toronto with his staff. He arrived in Toronto. As he prepared to board that flight to Taiwan from Toronto nonstop, one of his staff, with a passport with in excess of 5 years left on it, was refused because of a technical error, an error caused by your department, or at least the State Department, that had flagged it, even though it had been repeatedly verified, not as missing, as missing. Okay, fine. What can we do about it? It's a valid passport. Person did not get on the plane. They began talking to State Department in Toronto, obviously key member of the governor's staff. They said there's nothing we can do. It's midnight, Saturday. There was nothing they could do on Sunday. In fact, the individual came back to here, and in Washington at 8 o'clock in the morning, they made an application, got a brand new passport, and were out the door at 9 o'clock. And I want to thank you for that. I want to thank the entire team that facilitated it. But just like the 60 or so requests a month that my office makes that your people accommodate on an expedited basis, we know that a passport, particularly a renewal of an existing passport, can be done in an hour. The question is, why do we have a backlog of 13 weeks that is not, as you said in your opening statement, surged to get from 13 weeks to 13 days or 13 hours? Any business, particularly one that is able to derive revenue from each and every application, at least in the case of those which require, with all due respect, no adjudication, but in fact are purely administrative, would find a way to contract for additional services in addition to the services you have to get caught up. Can you please answer that question?
Thank you, and I'm also very sorry to hear that we were unable to assist in Toronto, and I intend to look into that, so thank you for letting me know. I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing to try to keep up with the unprecedented demand that we're experiencing.
Ma'am, my question was much more narrow than that. My question was, why are you not using or asking Congress, if you don't believe you have the authority, a technique to surge to get caught up, at least as to the mundane 5+ million renewables? In your opening statement, you rightfully so said, oh, we're going to make this to where it's online. Online in the wait 13 weeks isn't going to be much better, particularly when, as you know, most Americans, because it's not written on the passport, do not know, is this passport going to be accepted? Because it's not electronic. It doesn't tell you when somebody at Interpol has a problem. On top of that, it doesn't say, if you have less than 6 months left, good luck, you're screwed. The reality is that a big chunk of those people who come to us for expedited service, they've got 5 months and 25 days when they show up, and they get told, I'm sorry, you can't go to this country because you don't have X amount of months left. These kind of errors on renewals, in addition to the regular renewals, beg the question, and like I say, I want to make it I'm the last to ask, so I want to make it a narrow question, only one question. If it were my business, if I were the CEO of your enterprise, I would be asking, why can I not move that from 13 weeks to 13 hours? I can tell you that the governor of Virginia moved from all day to a matter of minutes at DMV, and he didn't even have to hire additional people. He simply had to start accounting for how they do it. In your case, you are talking about this demand, but I have to tell you, Google faced a doubling of its business every year. Lots of people face massive increases. I understand that adjudication by federal officers that are trained, that take time, that all of that are complex questions. And I've been working as a member of the Foreign Affairs for 22 plus years with your folks. And I've got to tell you, there's plenty of dedication. But this one finally has caused me to say, can you please ask me or answer, where is your plan? If you don't have it today, I think this committee has every right to ask that you have it in the near future. Where is your plan to take the mundane renewal of existing passports and get them down as fast as you did for that young staffer who needed to fly back from Toronto, get it, and catch up with her boss, the governor?
Thank you, Congressman. There's a little bit to unpack in there, and the one thing I want to highlight is that every passport adjudication is a national security adjudication, and we take that very, very seriously. There's a lot to unpack in there in that I think you're talking about things like automation, you're talking about things like I'm happy to talk to you about our plans to surge to address the current wait times. But in the future, what we're trying to do is we recognize that this demand is a trend and that it's not an anomaly. So we're trying very hard to hire more of these national security professionals to be able to address future demand. And then also to make investments in our technology. We don't want to hire our way out of this. We don't want to overtime our way out of it. We want to be able to take advantage of all of the kinds of technology that's available to us to be able to get ahead of it.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut this off because the chairman has limited patience. But I've been doing this, like I say, for over 22 years. I will give you an extensive, in-writing request. The request is for you to answer the question that I'm afraid you were not able to answer today, which is, I do not accept your statement about national security when it comes to the administrative process of the renewal. You have the existing passport. You have all that you need. It is an administrative process to take the picture, put them together, and so on. We contract out to private contractors security clearances at the TS level. If we can find a way to do that, then we certainly could find a way to get your 13-week backlog done, in addition to the clear need on an ongoing basis to have the service personnel in order to stay caught up. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your indulgence. I'll follow up with a couple of paragraphs, and with your indulgence, I'll ask you to answer it in writing.
I look forward to it. Thank
I
you.
thank you. Thank you very much. And I apologize if the question never really got understood, but I'll endeavor to do better in writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I thank you, ma'am, for your valuable testimony, and I thank the members of the committee for their questions.
Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I apologize, but there's one thing that I forgot to mention, and I'm kicking myself, and if you don't mind, I'd like to get it in the record, and that is to thank Representative Crow and other members of this committee for putting forward the Afghan Allies Protection Act. It is just another example of how grateful we are for the partnership of Congress in supporting our Afghan allies, and also for members of this committee. So my apologies, and thank you for letting me put that on the record.
We're happy to give you the opportunity to speak. We want your answers. I know the members appreciated when they received answers, and they would appreciate receiving answers in the future to questions that they have, questions that they may submit in writing, and plans that they would like to see on how to deal with this. You did hear from nearly every member, I believe, on issues relating directly to what all of our constituents, maybe the only time that they actually come in contact with the State Department is when they need a passport, when they need to travel, when they need to get to a family event. It's a priority for every person that goes in and out of the Capitol. And so we do hope that you will get back to us on plans, and plans rapidly, to address the issues that Americans are seeing. And we understand your statement that you don't want to necessarily overtime your way out of this, but sometimes when you're in a serious situation, you have to do what you can to get through the moment. And I think this is one of those situations, in my opinion. We need to get through the moment. We need to get caught up. We need to get people into a situation where they're not waiting months upon months to get a renewal of a passport that they may have held for years. The members of the subcommittee, as I mentioned, may have some additional questions for you, and we ask that you do respond to those in writing. And I now recognize Mr. Crow for any closing remarks that he may have.
Thank you, Chairman, for calling this hearing today. It was a robust discussion, and thank you, Ambassador Bitter, for your service and your testimony and for answering the questions. A few just very key takeaways for me today. One is recognizing the service of those State Department officials that, again, at great personal risk, all volunteered to go into Afghanistan to try to come to the aid of their friends and our partners and our allies, and I join you in recognizing that service. Number two, the State Department's after-action review of Afghanistan did reference the need for some holistic looks at how we handle contingency operations, because there's never a scenario ever where you don't experience a contingency or a crisis and you don't learn from it. That's a natural part of the military and the government becoming better. When we were in the military, we did an AAR after every mission, and there was always lessons learned. So we would love to work with you to look at some of those lessons learned and what type of structural reforms and resources we can put into play to make sure we're doing things better going forward. Next is your call for overall State Department funding, since your bureau, which is very forward-facing and interfaces with the American people and does very critical work, relies on those platforms of the State Department for your technology, making sure that we're making the investments to modernize that technology so that the American people can get the service that they deserve and that they expect, and we can continue to improve on those systems. And then finally, thank you for mentioning the Afghan Allies Protection Act, which is something that we have worked on in a bipartisan and bicameral manner for several years. The coalition of the Honoring Our Promises Working Group, which is a bipartisan working group that I co-founded along with some of my Republican friends, has done great work passing legislation. And for those who share our commitment in continuing to do everything possible to bring our partners and our friends to safety, we have to pass this bill because we are almost out of visas. We have almost exhausted the number of allocated visas, and the Afghan Allies Protection Act will increase the number of allocated visas by 20,000. But also, just as importantly, is it'll help us get those folks out of Afghanistan by making very important reforms to that system, such as allowing for remote processing and remote interviews. So we obviously don't have boots on the ground right now, and having the ability to conduct that remote interview and processing is essential for continuing to keep that pipeline for our friends open. So with that, I thank you for your testimony today. We look forward to following up on all of those issues and work with you to serve the American people, and I yield back.
Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.